The day my husband died, I thought I'd lost everything. But I was wrong. The real heartbreak came from my own daughter. She inherited his company, the house, even my dignity, and threw me out like a stranger. But a week later, the world flipped, and I watched her lose everything she had stolen from me. Before I continue, subscribe for more stories of love, betrayal, and karma, just like this one. When the security guard slammed the gate in my face, I thought it was a mistake. He'd been working for our family for almost 15 years. He'd watched my daughter grow up. But that afternoon, as the heavy iron gates clanged shut and the chill wind blew across the marble driveway, he couldn't even look me in the eyes. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Collins. I was told not to let you in. By who?" I whispered, my voice cracking. He hesitated for a second before saying it. The name that shattered everything I thought I knew about motherhood. By Miss Rebecca, my daughter, my only child, the same girl I'd once rocked to sleep during thunderstorms, now ordering me off my own property. I stood there, holding a suitcase that contained everything I had left. A few clothes, a photo of my late husband, and the papers that said I no longer owned a single part of the company we built together. Just a week earlier, I'd sat across from Rebecca at the long mahogany dining table, begging her to slow down. "Sweetheart, your father built that company with his hands. Don't let those board members push you into—" She raised a hand. "Mom, please. You don't understand business. You were always just—" The wife. The word just hung in the air like poison. I remembered the nights I'd stayed up packing orders, the mornings I'd stood by her father's side when he couldn't make payroll, the years I'd been his anchor while he climbed the ladder of success. And now, my own daughter, the one I'd sacrificed my youth for, was telling me I was just the wife. But what broke me wasn't just her cruelty. It was the letter I found in my husband's old drawer the night before I was thrown out, a sealed envelope addressed to me, written 2 weeks before his death. It contained only one sentence. "If Rebecca ever turns on you, look at the contract, not the will." I didn't understand what it meant then, but soon I would. And when I did, it would destroy everything Rebecca thought she'd inherited. That night, I sat outside my old home in the car, watching the lights flicker in the upstairs windows. Somewhere inside, my daughter was probably hosting another board dinner, wearing her father's watch, sitting at his desk, acting like she was born to lead. I'd seen it before, that same fire in my husband's eyes when ambition began to eat at his kindness. Rebecca had inherited more than his company. She'd inherited his hunger, and like him, she'd learned that hunger doesn't care who it devours. When I first met Michael Collins, he wasn't the man who built Collins Tech Industries. He was just a small-town dreamer with an old pickup truck and 1,000 ideas. I was working as a teacher's assistant, trying to pay off my student loans. When he walked into my classroom to fix a projector, he looked up from the tangled wires and smiled. You'd be surprised how much can run on broken parts, if you believe in them enough. That line, that mix of hope and arrogance, became his whole life philosophy. We married young. We didn't have much, a rented apartment, 2 second-hand laptops, and dreams bigger than our bank accounts. When he founded Collins Tech, I was right there, designing the logo, typing his proposals, even delivering coffee to meetings where no one took him seriously. But he never gave up. And neither did I. The company grew, then exploded. We went from hand-delivering invoices to negotiating million-dollar contracts. By the time Rebecca was 10, we had a mansion, a staff, and a company worth more than we ever imagined. But success changes people, even good ones. And slowly, Michael started spending more time at work than at home. Rebecca adored him. She'd sit by his side, playing with toy blocks while he drafted presentations. When she was a teenager, she'd tell me, "Dad gets it. Mom, he knows how the world works." I used to smile and say, "Yes, sweetheart. But one day you'll see what makes a person great isn't just power, it's heart." She never believed that. When Michael got sick, everything stopped. Stage 4, pancreatic cancer, the kind that doesn't give you time to say everything you should. He fought hard, But within 6 months, he was gone. At the funeral, I held Rebecca's hand as the press crowded around, flashing cameras and whispering about the new heiress. I didn't care about the company. I just wanted my family back. 2 weeks later, the lawyer called us in to read the will. I still remember the polished wood table, the sound of the pen scratching on legal paper, and Rebecca sitting tall in her black suit, looking so much like her father, it hurt to breathe. The lawyer cleared his throat. As per the late Mr. Collins' will, all company holdings, assets, and primary residence shall be transferred to Ms. Rebecca Collins. I blinked. I'm sorry. What? The lawyer looked at me sympathetically. Mrs. Collins, your husband made this decision 6 months before his passing. You're listed as beneficiary for a small trust fund, but the primary estate goes to your daughter. Rebecca didn't even look surprised. Instead, she smiled faintly and said, "It's what Dad wanted." For a few days, I told myself it didn't matter. I still had my home, my memories, and my daughter. But within a week, she started changing. She replaced her father's old partners with new, flashy names. She dismissed employees who'd been with us from the start. And when I tried to talk to her, she started calling me Mom in that distant, clipped tone, the one you use for someone you tolerate out of obligation. One morning, I went down to the kitchen and found the house staff packing boxes. "What's going on?" I asked. "Miss Collins said you'll be moving out by Friday," the maid whispered. Eyes full of pity, I laughed, actually laughed, because I thought it was absurd. But when I confronted Rebecca, she looked up from her laptop and said calmly, "Mom, it's not personal. I just need space. You can use the apartment in town. I'll handle the bills." The apartment in town. The one we used to rent out for junior executives. She was sending me there like I was an employee. That evening, I walked through the house one last time. The marble floors, the scent of jasmine candles, the family photos on the wall. Every memory we had lived inside those walls, and that's when I found it. The envelope. It was tucked inside the bottom drawer of Michael's old desk, sealed, with my name written in his messy handwriting. I hesitated before opening it, my hands trembling. Inside was just a single note. "If Rebecca ever turns on you, look at the contract, not the will." The contract? What contract? I searched through his files, but everything looked ordinary. Shares, board agreements, company documents. Nothing stood out. I folded the letter and kept it with me, not realizing that the clue he left would soon be the key to unraveling everything my daughter thought she owned. The next morning, I packed my suitcase quietly. No goodbye, no apology. Rebecca didn't even come downstairs. When I reached the gate, the security guard stopped me, polite but firm. "Miss Rebecca said you're not to return without permission." The words hit me harder than I expected. Permission. I gave her life, and now I needed permission to visit the home I'd built. As I stood outside those gates, the sun rising behind the house, something inside me broke. Not just my heart, but the illusion that love guarantees loyalty, I whispered. "One day, you'll understand what it costs to be ruthless." And I meant it. I walked away that morning with nothing but a suitcase. But I carried something my daughter didn't, the truth. And when I finally uncovered what her father had hidden in that contract, everything she owned would crumble. The apartment in town was nothing like the mansion I had just left. It was small, cramped, with peeling wallpaper and a faint smell of damp that no amount of cleaning could erase. I unpacked my suitcase slowly, feeling the weight of each item as if it were a memory I had to bury. My husband's watch, the framed photo of our wedding, the old letters he had written me when he first fell in love. All of it now belonged to the past. I sat by the window and watched the city move below me, unaware of the storm that had hit my family. People scurried, cars honked, and life went on, completely indifferent to the world I had lost in a single week. I thought of Rebecca. She was probably in the mansion, signing documents, making decisions, smiling at people who didn't know the first thing about what she had just taken from me. And yet, she had no idea how much she had inherited beyond the money and the walls. I thought back to my early days with Michael. How naive I had been, thinking love alone could protect me from everything. He had a fire in him, a brilliance that I admired even as it scared me. We had built Collins Tech Industries from scratch, working late nights, sacrificing weekends, arguing and laughing and dreaming together. Rebecca had grown up in that world, seeing the triumphs, the losses, the endless struggle to keep something alive. I had hoped that seeing those sacrifices would make her understand the weight of responsibility, but I was wrong. She had only seen the glitter, the glamour, the surface. The day the will was read still haunted me. I could remember the chill of the lawyer's office, the smell of polished wood, and the way Rebecca sat like she had been waiting for this moment her entire life. I had hoped, naively, that my husband would have left something more for me, some acknowledgement of all I had done. But the pages were clear. She was to inherit everything. I was to be grateful for a trust fund, a small sum compared to the empire we had built. At first, I told myself it didn't matter. Blood was thicker than contracts, love stronger than law. I believed Rebecca would see the truth on her own, that she couldn't handle this world without understanding its cost. But within days, I realized I had misjudged her. She didn't see me as a guide, as someone who had fought and bled alongside her father. She saw me as an obstacle, a shadow she needed to push aside to feel the full weight of power. The more I observed her, the more I realized she had changed. She was no longer the little girl who clung to my hand during thunderstorms. She had become someone else entirely, someone sharp, cold, and unforgiving. The family friends who had gathered at the mansion for dinners now whispered behind my back. They admired Rebecca's decisiveness, her charisma, her business acumen. They didn't see the cruelty hidden beneath the polished surface, the way she dismissed me, her own mother, as if I were a visitor in my own home. I began to look for answers in the things my husband had left behind. That contract he had mentioned in his letter haunted me. Every night, I went through old files, scanned through legal papers, and studied board agreements, searching for the clue he had promised. And then, one evening, after Rebecca had locked me out once again, I found it. It was a document tucked away in the safety deposit box we had opened years ago when the company first began expanding internationally. The contract was detailed and intricate, full of clauses and legalese, but one line caught my attention immediately. A clause that allowed control of the company to revert under certain conditions. Conditions that Rebecca, in her arrogance and haste, had already begun to fulfill without knowing it. I realized something then. My husband had known this day could come. He had anticipated her ambition, her impatience, her hunger, and he had left a safeguard, not for her, not for the company, but for me. The thought brought a strange sense of relief, a glimmer of hope in the middle of the devastation. I had been cast out, yes, but not without power, not without a way to reclaim what had been stolen. But I couldn't act yet. I had to be careful, patient. Rebecca was reckless, blinded by pride, and that would be her downfall. I watched from the sidelines as she made decisions, signed contracts, cut ties with loyal employees, and brought in new executives who flattered her rather than guided her. She believed herself untouchable, invincible, and that arrogance would be her undoing. The isolation of the apartment allowed me to think clearly for the first time in years. I reflected on my own mistakes, my trust in the wrong people, my inability to confront Rebecca sooner. I knew the road ahead would not be easy. It was no longer about the mansion or the company or even the money. It was about justice, about setting the record straight, about reclaiming the dignity that had been stolen from me. As the days passed, I began to notice cracks in Rebecca's armor. The executives she had brought in were not as loyal as they appeared. Some began questioning her decisions, whispering about poor investments and reckless expansion. There were signs of strain, faint but unmistakable, that even her confidence couldn't fully mask. I realized that I had time, if I was careful, to let her make mistakes, to let the empire she had inherited begin to crumble under her own hands. And so, I waited. I waited not with hatred but with a steady resolve. I had been thrown out, yes, but I had also been warned. Michael's foresight, his careful planning, had given me an edge that Rebecca would never see coming. I would watch, I would learn, and when the moment was right, I would reclaim what was mine, not with anger, but with the quiet, unstoppable force of someone who had built something from nothing and refused to be erased by betrayal. Little did Rebecca know, every arrogant decision she made was leading her closer to the edge. And when she fell, it would not just be the company she lost, it would be the illusion of power she had clung to so desperately, and I would be ready. The morning Rebecca officially asked me to leave the mansion, I felt a strange mixture of shock and resignation. She didn't raise her voice, didn't yell or slam doors. She simply handed me a formal letter drafted by her new corporate lawyer. It was cold, precise, and legally binding. "Mom," she said almost kindly, "it's time for you to move to your apartment. You can still visit, but it's better for both of us if we have space." Space. That word stung more than any insult could. I had lived in that house for decades, built it with my husband, filled it with memories, laughter, and tears. And now it was hers, and she called it space. I packed what little I could take with me. The house staff avoided eye contact, their loyalty divided between the mother who had nurtured them and the daughter who now held the keys to their livelihoods. Each step down the marble staircase felt heavier than the last. Every creak of the floorboards a reminder that the life I had known was gone. The first night in the apartment, I lay awake listening to the city hum through the thin walls. I thought of Rebecca, of the arrogance in her eyes when she waved me off, the certainty that she could control everything with a single signature. She had never faced real consequences, never seen the fragility of power, and that ignorance would soon cost her dearly. Meanwhile, at the mansion, she began making changes immediately. Employees who had been with the company for decades were replaced with young, ambitious recruits who flattered her instead of advising her. She cut contracts that she didn't understand and approved deals without reading the fine print. Every decision was impulsive, driven by pride, and fueled by the illusion that she had inherited her father's genius. I watched quietly, learning her patterns, noting her arrogance. Each reckless move she made only confirmed what I had suspected. The empire she now controlled was fragile, and she had no idea how to protect it. One evening, I found myself walking near the old Collins Tech building, observing her from a distance. She was in the boardroom, speaking with confidence, commanding respect, yet I could see the tension in her posture, the flicker of doubt she tried to hide. She smiled, but it was a rehearsed smile, one meant for show rather than sincerity. I remembered the contract my husband had left, the one that mentioned a safeguard if she ever mismanaged the company. I hadn't fully understood it yet, but I knew it was my key. I had to be patient. I had to wait until she revealed the flaws herself, until the cracks in her empire became impossible to ignore. Weeks passed. Rebecca's decisions became bolder, more reckless. She invested millions in a venture that promised quick returns, but was untested. She ignored warnings from experienced executives, dismissing them as old-fashioned or outdated. She held lavish parties in the mansion, celebrating deals that hadn't even closed, flaunting her newfound power as if it were a shield against reality. And then came the day she called me, finally breaking the silence. "Mom," she said, her tone deceptively light, "I need you to step aside completely. The apartment is fine, but I don't want you anywhere near the company. It's too distracting. The word cut deep, sharper than any insult. She had thrown me out, ignored my warnings, and yet still pretended concern as if my presence were an inconvenience rather than a right. I hung up the phone, trying to suppress the rage boiling inside me. But anger wasn't what I felt. It was a quiet, simmering determination. I had been pushed out, yes, but I had not been defeated. The contract was still there, waiting for me to uncover its full power. The next few days were tense. Rebecca's empire continued to expand at breakneck speed, but the foundation she built was shaky. Executives whispered about her impulsiveness. Investors grew uneasy, and small cracks appeared in the deals she had rushed to close. Yet she ignored them, blinded by confidence, unwilling to see that the empire she now claimed was beginning to crumble. And then, one morning, I received a call from an old friend who had been with the company since its early days. "Have you been watching?" he asked, voice tight with concern. She's making moves that could destroy everything. You need to act before it's too late." I thanked him quietly and hung up. The time was coming. Patience had given me an advantage, and soon, every reckless decision she had made would bear fruit that would fall heavily on her own head. I spent the night reviewing the contract again, each clause revealing more than I had realized before. My husband had been careful, deliberate. He had anticipated her pride, her impatience, and even her recklessness. He had left me a way back in, a legal foothold that could reclaim everything if she faltered. I went to bed that night not with fear, but with resolve. The betrayal was bitter, yes, but it was not the end. The empire my daughter thought she controlled was beginning to show its weaknesses, and when the first domino fell, she would learn what it truly meant to inherit power without wisdom, to claim authority without understanding responsibility. I closed my eyes and whispered a promise into the darkness. "You will see, Rebecca. You will see exactly what it costs to take what isn't yours." Rebecca's empire was teetering, and I was waiting in the shadows, ready to step in when the inevitable collapse came. Every arrogant decision she made, every reckless investment, every dismissal of experience was bringing her closer to the edge. And when she fell, I would be there, not out of vengeance, but to restore what had been taken and to ensure that justice, long delayed, finally arrived. The mansion that once stood as a symbol of our family's hard work now felt hollow, echoing with the mistakes of my daughter's ambition. Rebecca had taken it all, the company, the wealth, the status, and yet she seemed incapable of handling even a fraction of the responsibility. The first signs of her downfall were subtle, almost imperceptible, but anyone paying attention could see the cracks forming in the empire she had claimed. It began with the new executives she had installed. They had flattery in abundance and competence in short supply. Every suggestion they made seemed designed to make her feel confident rather than informed. They praised her intuition, her decisiveness, her visionary thinking, while quietly steering her toward risky investments, inflated contracts, and unstable partnerships. Rebecca, blinded by her pride, didn't see it, or maybe she didn't want to see it. One of the first disasters was a venture she threw millions into, a startup claiming to revolutionize technology with software that promised instant profits. The contracts were opaque, the investors unverified, but Rebecca had signed off without reading a single page thoroughly. She believed her father's genius had passed to her by inheritance, that the empire's success was a birthright rather than something built through patience and knowledge. Within weeks, the first cracks appeared. Payments were delayed, software failed, and legal disputes arose with angry investors who had been misled. Rebecca refused to listen to warnings from seasoned board members, dismissing them as old and jealous. Every time she received bad news, she brushed it off, saying confidently, "I can fix this. Dad never failed, and neither will I." Her confidence was growing dangerous. Employees began whispering in hallways, concerned about her reckless expansions. Loyal staff who had been with the company since its infancy grew uneasy, seeing the empire they had helped build slipping through her fingers. Yet Rebecca ignored them. She was intoxicated by power, by the illusion that she was untouchable and that her inheritance meant she could never fail. Then came the scandal. One of her most trusted advisors, a man she had brought in personally to oversee finances, had been embezzling funds for months. He had manipulated her trust, using her confidence and pride against her. By the time the truth came out, tens of millions were gone, siphoned from her empire with little hope of recovery. Rebecca's first public humiliation was swift and brutal. News outlets reported the mismanagement, calling her a naive heiress and questioning the future of Collins Tech Industries. She tried to fight back, issuing statements and reassuring investors, but her words rang hollow. Confidence without competence could only go so far. Lawsuits began to pile up, investors pulled out, and the company's stock plummeted. She couldn't understand how something that had seemed invincible to her just a month ago was unraveling. Even the mansion, which she had claimed with such pride, became a symbol of her failures. Contractors she had hired without proper vetting overcharged her, bills piled up, and maintenance was neglected. Employees who had remained loyal quietly left, tired of being ignored or dismissed. The house that had been a fortress of power and wealth for the family now felt like a gilded cage of misfortune. Rebecca's personal life began to mirror the chaos she had created professionally. Friends who had once admired her confidence now avoided her, uncomfortable with her arrogance and the public embarrassment that seemed to follow her wherever she went. Invitations to social events ceased, business partners hesitated to meet, and she found herself increasingly isolated. The confidence she had wielded like armor began to crumble, replaced with frustration, anger, and desperation. It was in this moment, when she thought she had everything, that my patience and planning came into play. I had not interfered, had not tried to save her from herself, because the lesson she needed to learn could only come through experience. And as the empire she thought she owned began to collapse, I began preparing quietly to reclaim what had been taken. The next blow came when one of her largest contracts fell through. A partner company she had rushed into business with suddenly filed for bankruptcy, leaving Rebecca responsible for millions in losses. The press caught wind of it immediately, publishing headlines about her poor judgment and reckless spending. Board members who had once been loyal to the Collins legacy started distancing themselves, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. She became desperate. Meetings that once exuded confidence now crackled with tension. Rebecca began making rash decisions to cover her losses, trying to salvage deals that were already doomed. She signed contracts without review, gave bonuses to employees who hadn't earned them, and attempted to woo back investors with promises that no one believed. Every attempt to regain control failed, each misstep accelerating the collapse she could no longer prevent. And then the final humiliation. One of her most public ventures, a lavish product launch meant to showcase her innovative leadership, ended in disaster. The product malfunctioned publicly, customers protested, and social media erupted with criticism. Investors called emergency meetings, demanding accountability. The company's reputation, which had taken decades to build, was shattered within a matter of weeks. Rebecca sat in her office, staring at the chaos on her screens, realizing for the first time that she had been in over her head from the very beginning. In that moment, the phone rang. It was her mother. Rebecca answered quickly, her voice sharp and defensive. "What do you want?" I spoke calmly, deliberately, letting the silence stretch before I said anything. "I want to see you, Rebecca. We need to talk." There was a pause, long and tense. I could hear the panic in her breathing over the line. She had never been this uncertain before. "Why? What could you possibly want?" "Because it's time," I said softly. "It's time to face the truth about what you've done and what you've inherited. You're losing everything, and you don't even understand why." She hung up, but I knew the seed had been planted. Pride, arrogance, and inexperience had led her to this point. The company she had claimed as her birthright was crumbling, and the first taste of consequence had just begun. As I prepared to step back into the world I had been pushed out of, I reflected on the lessons my husband had left me in the contract. It was not just a legal safeguard. It was a blueprint for recovery. Every clause, every condition had been designed to protect the legacy we had built together. And now, after Rebecca's mismanagement, the terms were being triggered naturally. Her actions, reckless and impulsive, were fulfilling the very conditions that would allow me to reclaim control. Rebecca's downfall was not instant. It was a slow, painful unraveling that mirrored the very arrogance she had carried with her. Her public image crumbled alongside her finances, and every attempt to regain stability only highlighted her lack of preparation and foresight. She was forced to sell off personal assets, including the mansion she had so proudly claimed. Media. Outlets reported on the auction, the stories highlighting how the young heiress had fallen from grace in a matter of weeks. I stayed silent during it all. I watched, not out of vengeance, but to let the lessons she needed to learn unfold naturally. Power without wisdom, wealth without understanding, and inheritance without responsibility. These were the truths she had ignored. And now, she was facing the consequences of her choices. The public humiliation was complete when key investors pulled their support entirely. Contracts were canceled, partnerships dissolved, and Rebecca was left scrambling. The empire she thought she had inherited was now in fragments, vulnerable and exposed. She reached out to board members, executives, even the press, but no one came to her aid. Confidence, which had once been her shield, could not protect her now, and in the midst of all this chaos, I began taking careful steps to reclaim what had always been mine. I reviewed the contract once more, ensuring every clause was understood and actionable. I contacted loyal advisors who had remained with the company through thick and thin, quietly preparing to step back in when the time was right. Rebecca's mistakes had made the path clear. Her downfall was accelerating faster than she could handle, and the legal safeguards were now fully triggered. One morning, as I watched from the apartment I had been forced into, I saw Rebecca standing in the boardroom, staring out the window at the skyline. Her hands were trembling, her posture rigid with tension. She had realized the magnitude of what she had lost, but it was too late. The contracts had been triggered, the financial losses were irreversible, and the empire she had thought was hers had slipped through her fingers. It was in that moment I understood the full scope of her downfall. She had believed that inheritance was enough, that bloodline could substitute for experience, and that power could be wielded without knowledge or patience. But she had learned the hard way. Everything can be lost in an instant when arrogance and ignorance guide your hands, and I, who had been cast out only weeks before, was ready. Ready not with anger, but with the quiet authority of someone who had built, nurtured, and protected an empire through patience, intelligence, and foresight. Rebecca had lost everything, and the world she had assumed was her birthright had crumbled before her eyes. As I prepared to step back into her life, I felt no satisfaction in her suffering, only the steady, calm resolve of someone who had waited for justice to unfold. Every reckless choice she had made, every arrogant dismissal of wisdom had led to this moment. And soon, very soon, I would reclaim not just the company, but the dignity and legacy that had been taken from me. Rebecca's empire was gone, her confidence shattered, her resources depleted. And for the first time, she realized that inheritance alone could never replace understanding, preparation, and respect for the foundations on which success is built. The day I decided to return to the mansion was quiet, almost imperceptible, as if the universe itself had been holding its breath. I didn't rush, didn't announce myself. I walked slowly, carrying nothing but a small leather briefcase, a symbol of the preparation I had quietly built over the past weeks. Rebecca's empire had collapsed entirely. She was left with public humiliation, mounting debts, and a reputation in ruins. Yet I did not gloat. There was no triumph in my steps, only a calm resolve. The front gates, once my prison, now stood open. The security guard, who had watched me be cast out weeks ago, looked at me with a mixture of respect and astonishment. I gave him a quiet nod. "I'm here to see Miss Collins," I said. His eyebrows rose. "She's waiting for you in the office, ma'am." I walked inside the mansion, now eerily quiet. The opulence of the rooms remained, but the energy had changed. Where there had once been arrogance, there was now tension. Where confidence had once ruled, there was doubt. Every corner of the house seemed to whisper of the mistakes Rebecca had made. I reached the boardroom. Rebecca was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, her reflection a shadow of the girl who had once thrown me out. She turned slowly, her face pale, her eyes wide, and for a fleeting moment I saw fear, the first real fear she had ever felt. "Mom," she began, her voice uncertain. Words faltered on her lips as she searched for control in a room where she had none. I didn't answer immediately. I let her panic simmer, letting her feel the weight of the empire she had destroyed. Then I spoke, calmly, deliberately. "Rebecca," I said, my voice steady, "it's time you understand something. Power without wisdom is fragile. Wealth without patience is fleeting. An inheritance without responsibility is meaningless." Her hands trembled. I didn't mean? I interrupted softly. "You meant to push me out. You meant to claim everything as if it were yours by right. You didn't consider the consequences. You didn't think about loyalty, respect, or legacy." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I continued. "I warned you, didn't I? I told you the empire wasn't just about money or titles. I told you to honor what we built. But you didn't listen." She sank into a chair, silent, unable to deny the truth. I walked to the head of the table and placed the briefcase down. Opening it, I revealed the documents that had been the key all along, the contract my husband had left behind, the clauses that protected the company in the event of reckless mismanagement. Rebecca's eyes widened. What is this?" she whispered. "This," I said, "is the safeguard your father left. The clause that would allow me to reclaim control if the company was mismanaged. And congratulations, Rebecca. You triggered every condition." She tried to speak, to protest, but no words came. The realization hit her like a tidal wave. Every rash decision, every reckless investment, every dismissal of wisdom had led her here. The empire she thought she owned had already begun the process of returning to its rightful steward. I did not gloat. I did not laugh. I simply laid out the steps I would take to stabilize the company, to protect the employees, and to repair the damage she had done. And I extended my hand, not to punish, but to teach, to guide, to reclaim what had been taken with dignity. "You need to understand something, Rebecca," I said. "This is not revenge. This is responsibility. I will restore what was lost, but you must learn the lessons your arrogance refused to teach you. Only then can we even begin to repair the trust and the legacy you nearly destroyed." For the first time, I saw her humility, her fear, her understanding of the weight of what she had done. She nodded, wordless, and for a moment I saw the little girl who had once clung to me during storms, the child who had looked to me for guidance and protection. I worked quietly over the next few days, stabilizing key accounts, bringing back loyal executives, and renegotiating contracts that had been carelessly handled. Rebecca shadowed me, observing, learning, and for the first time in weeks, she listened. Every instruction, every strategy, every correction she absorbed silently, her pride replaced with an understanding that the empire she had inherited was not a toy, but a responsibility. And then came the twist my husband had orchestrated. A clause in the contract ensured that the ownership of Collins Tech Industries would legally revert to me once the conditions were triggered. Rebecca's mismanagement had completed the criteria. The legal transfer was swift and unavoidable. In one decisive stroke, the empire returned to my hands, not as vengeance, but as justice and fulfillment of my husband's foresight. Rebecca sat across from me, her hands clasped in her lap, her face pale but calm. "So you own it all now?" she asked quietly, almost fearfully. "Yes," I said softly. "But it's not about ownership. It's about responsibility, stewardship, and respect. You have inherited much, but you will also inherit lessons you ignored the first time around. Perhaps next time you will understand." Tears streamed down her face. I never realized. I just thought I deserved it." "You did not," I said gently. "You earned nothing through arrogance. Everything comes from work, patience, and understanding. Your inheritance was a gift, yes, but it was never a free pass." She looked down, silent, understanding finally dawning on her. The daughter who had once thrown me out now faced the truth of her own hubris. The empire she had assumed was hers by blood alone had taught her the hardest lesson of all, that power without wisdom is fragile, and wealth without respect is meaningless. I reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You will have another chance someday, Rebecca," I said. "But first you must rebuild yourself. Learn humility. Learn responsibility. Only then can you truly understand the legacy you almost destroyed." For the first time, I felt a sense of closure that had eluded me since the moment she cast me out. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the fear, all of it had led to this moment of understanding. Justice and moral resolution. The mansion? Once a stage for arrogance and power, now became a classroom for lessons in humility. I guided Rebecca through every step of rebuilding her knowledge, understanding contracts, negotiating responsibly, and valuing loyalty. She listened, absorbed, and slowly began to regain confidence. But a new confidence, tempered by humility and respect, replaced the reckless pride that had nearly destroyed everything. Weeks turned into months. Collins Tech Industries stabilized under my guidance, while Rebecca gradually rebuilt herself, not as a naive heiress, but as a student of the lessons she had learned. She returned to the board, not as a conqueror, but as an apprentice, understanding at last that inheritance was only meaningful when paired with wisdom and responsibility. And in the quiet moments, when the offices were empty and the city hummed outside, I reflected on everything that had transpired. My husband's foresight, my patience, my endurance, all had ensured that the legacy we built would survive, that the lessons my daughter needed would be learned, and that justice would be served without cruelty. Rebecca never forgot the lessons of those weeks. She never repeated the arrogance that had led her to nearly destroy everything. She learned to listen, to respect experience, and to approach power with humility. And I, who had once been cast out, stood not only as the rightful steward of the empire, but as a mother who had turned betrayal into a teaching moment, heartbreak into wisdom, and loss into the triumph of patience and foresight. In the end, it was not revenge that restored balance. It was understanding, patience, and the quiet, unstoppable force of someone who had built something from nothing and refused to be erased by betrayal. The empire had survived, my dignity remained intact, and my daughter had learned lessons money alone could never buy. She looked at me one evening, after a long day of board meetings and strategic planning, and whispered, "I finally understand." "Mom," I smiled, placing my hand over hers. "Good, that's all I ever wanted. For you to understand, for you to be better than me, and for the legacy we built together to survive. That is all that matters." And in that moment, I knew that even the deepest betrayal could be transformed into a lesson, that even the sharpest pain could lead to understanding, and that even a fall from grace could give rise to wisdom, resilience, and the quiet triumph of justice. The mansion was no longer a place of exile or humiliation. It was a place of restoration, of reconciliation, and of growth. The empire had been saved, the lessons had been learned, and the future, once uncertain and fraught with betrayal, now gleamed with the promise of hope, responsibility, and understanding. I had been pushed out, cast aside, and humiliated. Yet here I stood, not in anger, but in quiet triumph. The daughter who had thrown me away had learned what inheritance could not teach alone, and I had restored not only the empire, but the balance, the wisdom, and the dignity that had been challenged so recklessly. And for the first time in weeks, I felt at peace.